วัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ Welcome to NBT World The Fireside. I'm Benjamin Ruchopakan.
And I'm Warisa Nidanat Gomon. Every week we have a fireside chat exploring what's going on in Thailand, diving deep into our latest obsessions.
Now, over the past several episodes, we've been exploring different parts of the legacy of Her Majesty Queen Sirikit, the Queen Mother. We've talked about so many different aspects of her legacy, like her impact on Thai arts and culture, on craftsmanship, on public health even, and children, their education, and other systems that she has helped build that still shape Thailand today. I think, if you had a favorite episode, do you know what that might be?
For sure. I love the arts and crafts, as you know.
Yeah.
What was your favorite?
I surprisingly really enjoyed the botany episode. I think because I had a personal connection to, I actually had been to the botanical gardens and I'd been on the canopy walkway and everything. So I found that really touching, that there was all this scientific research behind it, and there was this real sort of deep R&D approach to conservation, so that part of it gets me really excited about the future of that field in Thailand. Feels like we're innovating, we're taking it forward. But yes, the arts and crafts episodes were really up there, in my opinion. Especially all the ones that we found around Thailand, right? Because we talked about so much, right? What do we talked about ceramics in Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai ended up being a really major place for arts and crafts.
We talked about things that a lot of people might have missed, like silverware, lacquerware, or even nang talung, that's a dying art, I would say. But luckily we have Her Majesty's the Support Foundation and her legacy where it kind of continues. So the future generation can always go back and revisit these things.
That's right. And it really is this kind of unique this unique heritage, this traditional culture that people come back to Thailand for, because if we don't conserve our identity, then we become kind of like every other destination, I think.
Yes.
So it really helps us stand out. For this final episode in the series, we want to take a step back though. Instead of focusing on any one initiative or institution, we're looking at the life behind all of it. The person, the experiences, the historical moments that actually shaped how Queen Sirikit saw the world, the kind of, times that she was living through, and why she chose to act the way that she did. Now, because when you look closely, the projects we've discussed, they're not random. I think time and again we're talking about how these projects, these initiatives, they were formed, maybe they started out as one-offs, but they became interconnected systems. They're connected by a shared set of values: care, discipline, dignity, long-term thinking, and those values did not appear overnight either.
Right. Indeed, they did not. And they were actually shaped by a life that unfolded alongside some of the most turbulent moments in modern Thai history. For example, a childhood marked by uncertainty, a young adulthood defined by responsibility, and a role that required balancing tradition and a rapidly changing world. Now, so today, it's not just about listing achievements anymore. It's about understanding how Queen Sirikit became Queen Sirikit that we know, and how her life experiences translated that into a legacy that continues long after the moment of action has passed. Now, let's begin, shall we?
Let's do it. So, Queen Sirikit was born on August 12th, 1932, and that date is really important because it came just weeks after Thailand had undergone a fundamental political transformation from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one. So in many ways, she had been born into a country that was in transition. She was born into a family whose own life would soon be shaped by political change. So her father had left military service following this change in government, then from the absolute to the constitutional monarchy, and later served in diplomatic roles abroad. Now, because of that, Queen Sirikit spent a lot of her early childhood separated from her parents. While her father worked overseas, she remained in Thailand under the care of relatives. And at a young age, she had been experiencing distance, instability, and the feeling of being shaped by forces that were much greater than herself. I think we all feel like that, but it must be a totally different ballgame when you're talking about, being royal, So,
Yeah. Indeed. And her childhood also unfolded against the backdrop of global conflict, So at that time, it was during World War II, and Thailand experienced air raids and widespread disruption. And schooling was interrupted, obviously. Daily life became uncertain. Like many other Thai families at the time, hers had to adapt quickly to danger and scarcity as well. Now, what's important here is I'd like to say that it's not just the historical detail, but what it produced. These experiences instilled discipline, and it also instilled resilience and also a deep awareness of collective hardship. Now, according to her biography, her father emphasized values like responsibility, endurance, generosity, and sacrifice, using the realities of war as lessons.
When you talk to your grandparents or when you talk to, depending on how old you are, maybe your parents, direct parents, who lived through these times, like, it just feels like another lifetime. Like the amount of instability. I mean, we have our own share of instability, but it doesn't feel quite as real as what they're talking about. What they're talking about, I can't imagine what it's like for the entire government to change and, from monarchy to constitutional monarchy, to be living through the post, war of World War I and, and then going into World War II and all of that, it just must be so frankly scary to be living through that time and to know that you can only count on yourself, and each other. You can only count on yourself and each other to have the kind of strength to shepherd yourself through these trying times. So these values seem kind of abstract: responsibility, endurance, generosity, sacrifice. These all sound like abstract concepts, but they were really the North Star, of how to conduct yourself and how to live a life worth living. So because of all of that, her values stayed with her. And long before she had held any formal responsibilities, she had already learned what it meant to live through these uncertainties and to see how communities survive when people look out for each other. And that's really important. When we later see her responding to illness, to poverty, cultural erosion, the lack of opportunity, we've discussed this in one shape or another in the previous episodes. It's worth remembering that this instinct came from a lived experience in the country and learning to hold itself together during change. Thailand, learning to hold itself together amidst all of these forces.
Right.
That are like this, that are greater than the country, that greater than it can handle by itself, which is really the birth of multilateralism. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about what happened after the war. Now, Queen Sirikit's life shifted again, and this time beyond Thailand. Her father was appointed to diplomatic posts in Europe, and she joined her family overseas during her teenage years, and maybe that's where she learned how to speak so many languages.
That's right.
And she studied in England and then later in France and Switzerland. And if you go look at some of the other documentaries, you can see her speaking in French. And I find that quite impressive, actually, that she can speak many languages, especially back in the days. Nowadays, if you speak bilingual, like if you speak two languages, it's considered the norm.
Yeah.
But back in the day, if you can speak two languages, that's really excellent. But the fact that she can speak three and more, that's very, very impressive of her.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to her education. It speaks to, just, how well schooled she was and how attentive she was in schooling as well. I think it's both the teacher and the student.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to stay bilingual,
Yes.
so I can definitely appreciate that.
Right. And about her education, it was both academic and also cultural. So she learned languages, including English and French, as I said, and received intensive training in music, especially in piano. And later on, we'll know that she actually wanted to be a pianist, but that's for a little bit later.
That's right. Yeah, according to her biography, that she was deeply committed to music and had hoped to pursue a professional path as a pianist. And this tells us something about her sensitivity to arts, to discipline, to long-term practice, to having that farsightedness, because being a concert pianist must be endless hours. I think we talked about in a different episode, I tried my hand at different musical instruments, but none of them ever took. I was really bad at reading sheet music, so I really respect that. So these weren't just casual interests. She had a real ambition about them, and there were things that required structure, patience, and daily effort. Then she had continued her studies in Lausanne, Switzerland, at a boarding school that emphasized language, history, literature, art, and music. We tend to think of these humanities as just sort of the background rounding out of somebody's education. Back then, it was a real refinement of a person's education, of a person's upbringing. It's a very European style of education that focused on cultural awareness and responsibility rather than just sort of the technical specialization of like STEM fields, for example.
And at the same time, though, she still remained closely connected to Thailand through family, royal duties, and national events. And so from a young age, she was moving between worlds, right? Between Thailand and Europe. Tradition and modernity and private aspirations and public expectations. So there was a lot on her plate. Now that tension becomes really important later because it helps explain why she would eventually act as a bridge between Thai culture and the international stage. Rural realities versus global systems, and heritage versus adaptation. So there's always a balance or a juggle between these two things, and she finds the balance beautifully.
I would never dream to put myself in the same league as her,
but
no. I think we both sort of empathize with that experience. We both had somewhat mixed upbringings, spending some of our time in the States and some of our time here in Thailand. And even just that sort of banal version of what she went through, it's already a little bit of a struggle. We can sense that, like, we're not quite Thai enough, we're not quite American enough, So I would just wonder what it was like to have such a multicultural upbringing at that time, to be a member of the royal family at that time as well, and yet to have still preserved so much of her groundedness. She was still very grounded in the problems of the common folk. So I think it's a really, really impressive feat for her to stay so in tune with the struggles of the average Thai person, In the late 1940s, while living in Europe, Queen Sirikit met His Majesty, the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej the Great, who was studying in Switzerland at the time. Now, to learn what that meeting was like, we want to take a quick look at this 1978 interview of Queen Sirikit by the BBC.
It was hate at first sight on my side.
Hate at first sight?
Hate at first sight, because he said he would arrive in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He arrived at 7 o'clock, kept me standing there and practicing courtesy and courtesy. So it was hate at first sight.
Well, if it was hate at first sight, what was it at second sight?
Then it was love. Just the ordinary thing you have heard, love at first sight. I didn't know that he loved me because at that time I was only 15 years old and planned to be a pianist, concert pianist.
And then he had a car accident, didn't he? Well, what happened there?
He was gravely ill in the hospital. The police rang his mother and the princess mother came immediately. Instead of greeting her, he produced my picture out of his pocket without my knowing that he had one. And then he said, send for her. I love her, sent for her. I thought of being with the man I love only, not of the duty and burdens of Queen.
Yeah, I am so impressed that she was confident to be frank about that interaction. Just speaking from personal experience, if I keep someone waiting that long, there's no second date on that one.
I love the fact that being late for a date is not exclusive. Like even if you're the king of Thailand, you still go by those rules. And I love, exactly that. She was very frank about it.
Yeah, and she says like that he had me practicing curtsies. I think that's something a little missed in translation. It's really just that like she was forced to like while her time away, just in anticipation, as the anticipation is building and building to meet this person.
Right.
But yeah, I thought it was so touching that he had fallen so in love with her, that King Bhumibol had fallen so in love with Queen Sirikit that he kept a photo of her, and asked to send for her, and I'm kind of romanticizing this language, but to send for somebody, that's I really love. It just feels like a really grand romance,
If I had to be honest, the part where I loved the most was at the end where she said, I married the person that I love, not for the royal duties, or the burden that came from it. So, she was also in love. So it was like, it was like a little rom-com, kind of like a nice royal rom-com, in my opinion. I thought that was sweet.
Yeah, I was getting a major sort of Princess Diary vibes in the beginning of it. Just, there's no such thing as a smooth romance. But we had no idea. I mean, I bet she had no idea at the time what kind of, legacy they would share together and what kind of life they would lead together.
They were married on April 28th, 1950 in Bangkok, and shortly afterward, she was formally elevated to queen. Just days later, King Bhumibol was crowned and Queen Sirikit assumed her role at a remarkably young age. But what's cool and so empowering is the fact that everything that followed showed that this was not a symbolic position. According to her biography, she quickly took on real responsibility. In 1956, when King Bhumibol entered the monkhood, she was then appointed regent, which means that she had to act on his behalf. So she was taking a lot of responsibilities. And this was historically significant because it placed her at the center of governance during a very critical moment.
That's absolutely right. That appointment really reflected the trust in her ability, and it was a recognition that she was already deeply involved in the work of the monarchy at the time. And from that point on, her role expanded beyond formal duties. She became a working partner in royal development, accompanying the king on visits across the country, observing conditions firsthand, and responding to what she saw on the ground, which we've covered in a lot of our previous episodes. So this is where the through line becomes clearer, how her early experiences shaped her future endeavors. The childhood shaped by instability, the education shaped by discipline and cultural refinement, the exposure to all these global systems at odds with what's going on in Thailand, but still interconnected. All of it converged into a way of working that emphasized being present, observation, and long-term commitment. And in this case, the commitment is to her people.
That is correct. And that approach would eventually define everything we've already discussed throughout our episodes here, from health to education to culture to environment and, of course, community life. When people talk about Queen Sirikit's legacy, it's tempting to list institutions.
Yeah.
For example, hospitals, foundations, museums, programs, and the list can go on.
Yeah.
And yes, we've done this as well. But it's impossible not to. But taken alone, that misses something very, very important here. Because what has truly defined her work was not the number of initiatives, really, but the method behind them. And again, her biography shows the same pattern. She went to places herself. She observed directly. She listened, and only then did she act.
That's right. Like a lot of her solutions, they seem, the saying where there's like great ideas, they seem obvious in hindsight. And a lot of her approach is somewhat obvious in hindsight. That, it's tempting to be like, well, she just filled the gap in the market. But nobody realizes the gap until it's been filled. Nobody realizes just what crucial systems she put in place, or how important they were before they ever existed. It's hard to imagine what has never been. So that approach came through lived experience, from a childhood shaped by political upheaval and separation from her parents, from years spent adapting to new countries and cultures, from education that emphasized discipline, care, and responsibility. And can I say, that's not a foregone conclusion. These things don't happen to every child that has that kind of upbringing. Having a multicultural, I know plenty of these sort of multicultural kids that have grown up abroad and have mixed educations and go to fantastic schools. They don't universally come out with the same discipline, with the same groundedness, with the same sort of global perspective, So I don't, it's not something to be taken for granted. It's not a foregone conclusion that she had all these resources and she was going to take advantage of them. It's really a singular person that does that. When she later traveled across Thailand with King Bhumibol, that mindset stayed consistent. She didn't treat development as some kind of abstract policy that we hear this language a lot, like, oh, national development. This is a real thing. And this is centered on the people that development is built around. Who is struggling, why, and what can be done that will actually stand the test of time. And that's why so many of her initiatives cut across different categories. They're multi-sectoral. Health connects to education. Education connects to livelihoods. Livelihoods connect to culture. And culture connects to the dignity of her people, and so on and so forth. So that's why it's very difficult to separate any of these programs from each other. For example, we've mentioned time and again the Support Foundation in different aspects, in different episodes, even though the episodes, they seem like they're not totally related. Like, what does craft have to do with botany? But all of them are interconnected. They're all connected through the shared ethos of supporting dignity, hence Support Foundation.
Right. Yes, and that also explains why a lot of her projects focuses on women, family, and also children. Not because they're isolated groups, but because they were the foundation of a community stability. And in that sense, her legacy is in many ways systemic. And that system is built around presence, community, and also care.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that gets lost in the sauce a little bit today when we talk about. I often feel like capitalism sells us a vision of liberation. They tie money to personal freedom, you know, and they tie products to personal freedom. If you use this service, then you don't have to wait around. Everything's more convenient for you. Then you can live life on your terms. But people are not islands. They don't live in a bubble unto themselves. And it is self-destructive to think of ourselves as in a bubble separate from other people. And I think that she knew that women, children, families, the core unit of Thai society at its smallest point is the foundation, is where everything springs forth, you know, where all prosperity begins and ends. You know, if you can get the family unit right, then you can get the rest of it. You know, then you build the inner strength and stability to prosper at a national level. So now, more than half a century after she first became queen, Queen Sirikit's influence is still visible across Thailand in all of the many institutions that carry her name, but also in the ways of thinking that continue to shape public life. Healthcare that reaches remote institutions or remote communities rather, education that values continuity and dignity, cultural preservation that is tied to people's livelihoods, and environmental stewardship that begins with people and not trying to compete with their interests.
Right. And these ideas kind of feel familiar today, but they were not inevitable. They were built through decades of attention, adaptation, and persistence. And that is why the series matters, right? Not to memorialize her as a distant historical figure, but to understand how one life who is shaped by discipline, empathy, and responsibility, help influence the direction of an entire nation.
That's right. She's not just what she created. It's about how she created it. It's about how she worked. And that's the most enduring lesson of all. Because systems can change and institutions, they can be renamed, you know, but the values that are once embedded deep enough, they last, you know. And that brings us to the end of our whole series on Queen Sirikit.
And now we turn it over to our audience. Which place, project, or story in this series has made you see Queen Sirikit's legacy in a new way?
Let us know in the comment section of NBT World's online channels. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Spotify.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ